So this is a conference put on by a Java group. So naturally, we're going to talk about some JavaScript. We're going to talk about Ionic today. Self-proclaimed missing SDK for hybrid apps. My name is Mike Hartington. You can find me on Twitter if you really want to. So kind of an overview of what we're going to be talking about today is we're going to look at hybrid apps at what they are from a really high level and what they mean to a developer. We're going to take a quick look at Angularjs, the framework that Ionic is built with. Then we're going to take a look at Ionic itself. And after that, we're going to look at an app I built, kind of show you what Ionic can really do. So what you should know before getting into this is that this is JavaScript. So you should be pretty comfortable with that. You should also be pretty comfortable working with a terminal. I'm going to assume that you have Node.js already installed on your computer and some knowledge of Angular. And just a little cherry on top, you should be kind of comfortable with mobile design concepts. So how do you go ahead and what is a mobile app? What is its context versus what is a full site? So like I said, this is a talk in 3 parts. So we're all developers. We all have people who come up to say to us, hey, I have this really great idea for an app. You and me, we go in it, we get every single platform out there. We get iOS, Android, Windows Phone even. And we're going to make millions. We're going to be super successful. We're going to be the next Facebook or Twitter. And it seems like it's going to be this really great experience. But it's not really. If you think about it, those are 3 separate languages that you have to be pretty proficient in. And if you're not, you're going to need another developer. And if you're a small startup or small shop, it's going to be pretty expensive to keep people, to hire people who are native developers. And not only that, you got to maintain those code bases. So, the easiest way to make sure that a project is easily maintainable is to keep the code base nice and small. If you have 3 different languages, it's going to be next to impossible. And at the end of the day, how much money are you really going to be making off of this? After you pay people, after you get everything all set up, you're not really going to be making too much using this native approach. So, the more more platforms that you want to support, the more problems that you're going to have. So we want to get down to at least 1 platform. So let's go ahead and get rid of that guy. It's not too bad. And Android, which is most of the market, it's about 40–50%. So now we're just left with iOS, which is stuck at like 30% of the market. So from like a financial standpoint, it's not really a smart decision. Those are all markets that you've missed out making money from. Oh boy. Cool. So are there any alternatives? And yes, there's this thing called Apache Cordova. If you've heard of it before, you've probably heard of it by PhoneGap. So essentially what we have is a native component that behaves exactly like a web view. So you can feed it HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and actually load that onto your device and sell it through the App Store. You have access to device APIs through consistent JavaScript methods. And you're developing in a single code base, all for the web. And so, you can write once and run everywhere. But, turns out, yeah, you can. So let's check out my terminal. So it said that Node.js was kind of a requirement. So if you don't have it, make sure to install it, and we can go ahead and install Cordova. Make sure that shows up good. All right, so if you don't have it installed, you would install it with npm install Cordova, and then you want to pass in the global flag. If you guys can see that pretty well, make it bigger. So that would be the command that we would need to install, and that's going to go fetch everything that we need. I already have it installed, so I'm not going to go through that. So Cordova, since it is an npm package, it comes with all these commands that you can use to help create a project and get started right away. So we'll go ahead and use one of them called create, and we're gonna pass in a name for this. So it's gonna be called Hello Georgia. And we're gonna go in there, and then we're gonna take a look at the structure real quick. So we have these directories. We have this platforms directory, which is going to house all of our native components, all of our native platforms. We have this plugin directories, which is going to house all of our native plugins if we want to add. Say if we want to access Bluetooth, more accurate geolocation, if we want to actually get access to the camera, we can house all these plugins here. But from a developer, you're really going to be spending most of your time in this www directory. So we can take a look at this JavaScript file, which is essentially going to house everything we need. So we can come in here, and it's not really important what's going on here. All that really is important is that it's listening for this event. So Cordova and PhoneGap work with this device ready event. So anytime you start an app that is made with PhoneGap or Cordova, it's going to emit this device ready event. So anything that you need to run that's going to actually access native code, you want to make sure that it runs after that. So in this example, we're listening for the device ready event, and then we're just going to show and hide two elements inside index.html. So let's close this, take a look at index. So we have these two tags, event listening and event received. And this one will show when the device is loading. This one will show when the device is ready to make native calls. So let's clear that. And so I want to test this out on iOS. So Cordova comes with a command that you can actually use that with. Cordova platform add iOS. That'll go out, fetch everything we need. And so we can look inside the platforms directory. We now have an iOS project. And we can go even further to say that, let's look inside the iOS folder. And you'll see we actually have a native project in there. We actually have an Xcode file. So I want to actually go ahead and run this on a simulator, which is already running. So Cordova Emulate Ios. So this is going to send it to the iOS simulator, which I have over here. I'll just go for a little bit. Cool. So you saw it pretty quickly. We already have devices ready showing, which means we can now actually make native calls if we really wanted to. Not going to do any more with that. So let's get back to the presentation. So yeah, I just showed you a quick iOS example because I don't have 10 minutes to wait for the Android emulator to actually boot up. But you can do the same thing for an Android device or even Windows Phone and a bunch of other platforms. So I really urge you guys to check out their website, Cordova.io, I believe, to find out more of what platforms they actually support. So Cordova isn't really this kind of pet project. There's actually some pretty big names backing this, specifically Google, Microsoft, and Adobe. But there's also other people from like Amazon, IBM. These are all people who have teams of developers contributing to the project to make it better and make it easier for us regular developers to actually work with. But with all that, there are some things that they don't really tell you. Specifically, there's no UI. If you were to develop an app for iOS or Android, you get the benefit of having all these components already built for you. So header bars, action bars, whatever they're called in Android. Actually having transitions and all these multi-touch gesture support. This is all built into that native SDK. You don't have to think about it as a native developer. You just get it. There's no JavaScript framework, which necessarily isn't a bad thing. But if you're working on a large project with multiple developers, what's great about a JavaScript framework is that it can actually get the team all on the same page. So you're not having to, okay, well, this person writes their code this way, this person writes their code this way. This gets everyone thinking in the same working space. And this last one is it's true for native development as well. Old Android is not a nice place to work. If you've ever done any kind of mobile web design, you'll have to deal with Android 2.3 because that is still around for some reason. It essentially becomes the IE6 of the mobile web. So that was a quick little overview of Cordova. So let's take a look at Angular, so the second part of the talk. So Angularjs, it's a JavaScript framework. It's great. It follows this pattern of MVW, so model view, whatever. You can do model view controller, model view view model. They don't care how you actually structure your code, just as long as that there is a structure. So it also brings this concept of directives. So reusable components that you can create and then reuse in your application multiple times without having to rewrite that code. And then something that's kind of the big win is this concept of two-way data binding. So two-way data binding ends up being if you have some data in your model and then you display it on your view, no matter where it would change, if you change it in your view or if you change it in your model, everything's going to stay in sync. Everything will keep up to date. So we'll go through the MVC parts of it. We'll look at the model. So a model data can be loaded through your app, mostly using these two methods. So we have this thing called a factory. It's essentially a way to go out and provide some global functions. So in this one, we're going to have a factory which is going to return a function get speakers. And what's that going to do? It's actually going to make a HTTP request to the Devnexus site and get a speakers.json file. We're going to use get method. But what's great is that since we have that all set up, it's only going to worry about getting the data. Now we can actually load that data in a controller. We can call speakers.getSpeaker. So speakers is the name of the factory. We're able to inject it into this controller. And we're able to have access to that getSpeakers function. And then when that request is successful, we're going to take the data from that request, and we're going to actually set it to this empty array of speakers. So from there, we can actually iterate over that and put and set up a view. So a view is follows typical standard. It's just a simple HTML page that's going to show you data. You don't need to put any application logic in there. It's just going to be what are you going to display to the user. But you're going to notice there's a few extra things that aren't really part of the HTML spec. So we have these ng controllers and ng repeats, and curly braces are somehow in HTML. So what are these? So the ng controller is essentially a great way to say, hey, that last controller that we made, we want it to affect only this div element. So everything between here and here, we're going to want to use we're going to want it to be scoped to that element. That ng repeat is essentially saying, hey, for every object in an array, print out a new element for each for the object. So in that last slide, we made an array called speakers. Well, now we can, since we're using that controller, we have access to it, and we can say, hey, iterate over each speaker object in speakers array, and then print out the first name, the last name, and the bio. So those curly braces are going to essentially be our placeholders. So now when this all renders, we're going to get speaker's first name, last name, and everything about them. We'll look at this quickly. So any application that is just one view isn't really compelling. So we can actually go ahead and set up multiple views and have them and actually be able to navigate to them. So in this example, we've created something called states, which are essentially application views. And we can say that we have a state called sign in. When we get to the state, the URL should update to sign in. We're going to give it a template. So essentially, the same thing that we just looked at. And it's going to be located in a templates directory, signin.html. And then we're going to also apply a controller to that. So in the last example, I put a controller right inside the code. But this is a great way to say, hey, I don't want to divvy up my HTML and actually put this ng logic in there. I just want to apply it here and then forget about it. And then the next one is essentially the same thing for a different state. So if a user forgets their password, they can navigate to this and start actually figuring out what their password is. And then we have this last part, the URL router provider .otherwise. So if the URL of the website is anything but those two that we've provided, we can actually create a redirect saying, hey, that's not really a valid URL. We don't need 404s over here. We can just send them back to sign in. So directives are probably the most powerful and most complicated part of Angular. So like I said before, they're reusable custom components or elements that you essentially can give predefined functionality. So we'll take a look at what that is. So this essentially is a throwback to the old blink tag from Web 1.0. So we can actually go ahead and say, hey, we have a directive, and we're going to call it blink. So we can actually say when we want to use it, we're just going to use standard HTML tags and embed it in blink. We're going to say, yeah, we want it to be an element only, so you can't use an attribute or anything else. And we're going to give it two functions. So we're going to have a function called show element, which is just going to set the visibility to visible. And then after a second, we're going to call hide element. So hide element is just going to hide the actual element. And then another second later, we're going to call show element. And to kick everything off, we're going to call show element right off the back. So when you want to actually use it, it's just going to look like this. But when the user actually loads the page, you should get something similar to that. So how does this all come together? Actually, go back to the terminal. So I have this little demo. I'm going to start up a server. Hopefully that'll load. Cool. So this is actually using that same request to the Devnexus speaker.json. So I actually have a quick little request of all the speakers that are at the conference, and iterated over them without a whole lot of code. And for added benefit, I've actually gone ahead and implemented a quick little filter. So I can say if I want to look up myself, I can actually filter out who I want to search for. If I want to look for another person, I can look for them by just passing in their name, or even anything that I'm going to be rendering out. So anything that's in this bio tag or in their biography, I can actually filter by. But how does this all look as far as code goes? So let's look it up in Vim. So right here, we're just going to fetch the actual Angular library and get some CSS. That way we can actually make things look somewhat good. And here is going to be most of our application logic. So we actually have this attribute up here called ng-app. If your app gets pretty complicated, you're going to want to use this attribute, so that way you can start namespacing everything. We have our ng controller over here. We have our ng repeat. We have speakers our first name, speakers our last name, and our bio. So all this should be pretty familiar from my slides. But this ng show and this ng hide is something else that I haven't shown. So ng show and ng hide are more examples of directives that are built into Angular that we can actually call functionality if everything inside of it evaluates to true. So ng show up here will actually set the display to show when is loading is equal to true. And ng hide will show when is loading is equal to true as well. So we can open up the app.js, which is going to hold most of our logic. And you can see I have a 22-line file, and that's essentially everything that I have. So that ng app that I told you about, I have a module in here called my app. So that's where that's going to go. And then I can go ahead in here and have that speakers factory again. Again, it's going to go out, fetch the speakers.json file. And then I'm going to do some stuff here in my controller. So again, I have this empty speakers array. And then I have this thing, I have this other value, is loading. So when I get my data from speakers.getSpeakers, if it's successful, I'm going to set the list of the array of speakers to whatever the response is. And you can see from the data structure, actually, it gets nested into this very weird JSON object. So I have to go to data, the speakers list, speaker to get everything. And then I'm going to set is loading to false. So that way I can actually hide the loading indicator and actually show all the data I've just requested. So with that, it's pretty powerful, considering that this is only 22 lines of code. My index.html is only 32 lines, and this isn't even minified or uglified or anything. This is actually pretty clean. So it's pretty powerful, considering I haven't had to write a lot of code yet. I have all this functionality given to me. So yeah, that's really a brief overview of actually what Angular is. And I don't have time to go into all the details of everything that it can offer. But there are some great people out there who have actually already done this. Dan Wallin is a developer who's heavily involved in the Angular community. And he actually put out this 60-ish minute video going over all the essentials that you need for AngularJS. So I really urge you guys, copy this link down and check out that video. It's really great. I'll leave it up for a second.
Do you guys foresee yourself making any major changes with Angularjs if they're pushing 2.0?
I will get to that. Happy that you asked that. So, again, with Cordova, there are some things that they don't really tell you right off the bat. So UI apparently is this big problem that a lot of JavaScript frameworks have, because this one doesn't come with a UI as well. You either have to implement your own or use someone else's. Not necessarily a bad thing, since you can actually go ahead and make your app however you want, but that's another thing that you have to think about. And Angular is very, likes to be in control. It's very opinionated on how things should be done. And if if you don't know that and you try to go ahead and use something, say jQuery, you're not going to have a good time. It needs to be done in Angular standards. ng-repeat, I just showed you, it was really powerful, but it also can be a big performance hit. So if you want to render out, say, something over 1,000 people or 10,000 if you're doing something even larger, it's going to kill your performance, because what it's going to do is actually render all 10,000 items. Your DOM is just going to, become incredibly slow. You're not going to be able to get this speedy page load, and everything's just going to fall apart. And these last two, if you don't know Angular, or if you're coming from, say, Backbone or even Ember, there's a bit of a learning curve. There are some concepts that you have to understand, and you have to kind of get into this mindset of, how does Angular want me to do this? I don't want to go ahead and use all my DOM manipulation inside of a controller. I should probably move that out to a directive. I don't want controllers that are going to be incredibly large. I should probably move some of this application logic to a service or factory, so that way it can be reused. So I've gone over the two parts. Let's take a quick step back and actually look at everything. So we have Cordova. We can create cross-platform mobile apps. We don't have a JavaScript framework. It started around 2009, and there's no CSS framework with it. We have Angularjs, so we can create scalable web apps. We have a structured JavaScript framework with it, and it was also started around 2009, and there's no CSS framework. I like to think that the times when these both started was kind of everything lining up correctly. So what do we need now? We need these rich components that are equivalent to what a native developer would get. We don't need a few widgets here and there. We need everything all encapsulated, so that way I don't have to think about it. I can just use it and be happy. We need support for gestures, these native transitions, and all these complicated navigation stacks. And we want our UI to have actual APIs that we can actually use, and not just use something like jQuery. So that's the kind of where Ionic comes in. So what is Ionic but the beautiful open source SDK for developing hybrid apps, hybrid mobile apps with HTML? But what essentially does that mean? So we're built on web standards. So HTML, CSS, JavaScript. So if you're a web developer, congratulations, you are now a native developer. You don't need to relearn a new technology stack. You're all set with just your web code. We're going to use Angularjs because it's been proven for large applications. It's been proven on the desktop. It's been proven to work on mobile as well. It also gives us those directives that we want, so we can create these reusable components and have all this functionality and let a user actually use whatever code they want and not have to think about the underlying functionality. And we have these services and factories that we can use. So that way we can go out and actually have global functions that we can actually we can inject code into the DOM if we want. We can actually go ahead and fetch data, etc. And importantly, it's native focused. So it's built to model these native SDKs and built to work with Cordova. That being said, it's not going to replace something like Twitter Bootstrap for your desktop and your responsive web design. This is something that's going to be used on a mobile app that you can install on a phone. And from the ground up, we're written using Sass. So if you don't know about Sass, it's a preprocessor for CSS. So that way we can actually write our CSS more efficiently and not have to copy everything for each new color that we would want. So if we want to say, hey, I have a color for green, we can use variables. We can say, okay, well, my variable for green is going to equal this value, and then I can just populate that wherever I want in my Sass style sheets. And we can also have these kind of function-like things called mixins. So that way we can pass in some data into it, and it should just populate everything else. So a popular example of this is border radius. We can actually say, hey, here's my border radius. We're going to include this into this Sass block, and we're just going to pass in the value of 5. When that renders, or when that compiles, we're going to get all the vendor prefixes and everything, and all we had to do was just use the mixin and pass in the value we want. And built on top of the Cordova CLI, we also have an Ionic CLI. So that way you can get started with an Ionic project right away and get all the benefits of using these build tools that we have set up. So you can use stuff like gulp. You can have Sass installed, so that way you can compile everything if you want. And if you want a package manager, we're using Bower for now, but that comes by default. We also come with live reload. So if you start developing your app and testing locally, any changes you make will automatically update in the browser. Since we're using Bower, we can actually go ahead and make sure that we're always going to get the latest and greatest version of the Ionic code. So we can update our JavaScript files and our CSS files. And also, we provide commands, so that way you can go out and actually build these native binaries. Take a quick look at that. So, like I said, it's based on NPM, so if you don't have it, you would do npm install Ionic, so install, type, npm install Ionic. I already have it installed, so I don't need to go do that. So we'll do ionic.h. So essentially this is our help command, which can show you everything that you really need to get started. Let's zoom out a little bit. So there's a lot going on, but a lot of the options that you're seeing here are all these flags that you can pass in. So that way you can configure your build to be however you need it. So clear that, zoom in again. That looks pretty good. So I want to start a project. I'm going to go ahead and say Ionic start. I'm going to give it a directory name. And then I want to pass in a template. I really like tabs application lately, so I'm going to give it a template of tabs. It'll go out, it'll warn me that I already have a directory, name that, and I want to override it. So it's going to go out, fetch everything that we need, get the appropriate Cordova plugins that we need, and set everything up for me. So now we can get into that directory And see, we have a few things in here populated for us. So like I said, we're using gulp, so we have a gulp file that can give us all these build tasks. If you're not familiar with gulp, essentially it's grunt, but better. We have our bower.json file, so that way we can actually keep track of all of our packages. We have a SAS directory up here, so that way we can actually start customizing Ionic. And then we have that www directory that we saw back with Cordova. So let's actually go ahead and serve this. Cool. So we have this simple structure right here. We have some scrolling. We have the standard kind of navigation that you get with an iOS-styled app. We have these swipe to reveal buttons that we don't have to think about. It's already provided to us. We have these native toggles, and again, if I were to come here and go to this directory or this structure, I can come back here, even go here, and then return, and know that it's going to maintain its state. So the serve command is pretty cool, but we have a flag that you can pass called lab, which you can actually go ahead and start seeing how is this going to look on iOS and how is this going to look on Android. So we're going to be doing some platform-specific tweaks, something that we want to call platform continuity. So that way, whatever you are doing with your app, you don't need to rethink it if you want to go ahead and build the Android version. We're just going to take care of it for you. So specifically on iOS, tabs are at the bottom, but on Android, they're at the top, and the title is left aligned. Something like that, it seems like it's a small change, but it's actually a pretty powerful to know that I didn't need to think about that. It's already taken care of for me. And all this stuff is highly configurable, so if you don't want this, you can go ahead and change it. So we have different animations for iOS and Android. Different kind of toggles for Android and iOS as well. And these are all gesture-based. Cool. So, yeah, and that's something really, really quick to just kind of get you guys in the idea of what this CLI can do. And we can actually go ahead and actually build and add the platforms for, say, iOS, Android, and actually get these native binaries. So I showed you the quick steps, but just so we can go over it again. We want to install Ionic CLI. We're going to install Cordova, Gulp, and Bower. And we're going to make all these packages global. We're going to say Ionic start. In this line, we're going to call it My App, and we want to base it off the side menu. So we'll get the quick little drag to reveal side menu structure that is made popular in iOS. We're going to cd into that directory that we just made, and then we're going to do Ionic serve again, and then we can go ahead and open this up in whatever text editor you want and start developing and making your app without having to think about everything else. You get back to the point, you're on this happy path where you can just focus on what makes your app yours. So I cherry-picked a few components that I really, really like to show off today. First one is the side menu structure. So these are all based off of directives, and we can actually start looking at this side menu structure, and we already have an idea of what's going on here. So we have this whole component called Ion side menus. But inside that, we want to have a menu on the left, and maybe if we even want it, we can have a menu on the right. So we can already tell where those sides are going to be, not by the structure, but by these attributes called side. So we can say Ion side menu side equals right or side equals left, and know where it's going to land. And then we want to have a main content area where we can actually render views into. So we're going to say we want an Ion side menu content. And inside there, we're going to give this navigable view, so that way we can show you what's going on in this GIF, where we're actually changing views and loading the data into it. So I showed off tabs last just a few minutes ago, but you can see tabs are pretty powerful. So we can actually have nested views inside of all of our tabs, and go over each component and have these states where I can go from tab 1 to view 1, go to view 2, and then view 3, switch to tab 2, navigate around a little bit, go back to tab 1, and know that my history stack is going to be maintained much as it would be with a native app. And it's pretty simple to start setting up. We have our tabs component, which is going to house everything. And then for each tab that we want, we're just going to pass in an Ion tab. We want to give it an icon. We have an attribute called icon, which will evaluate the icon that we want to give it. And then we can give it another view, nav view that we want to work with. So lists are pretty common, but we're doing some pretty awesome stuff with it, I think. So Ion items and Ion lists essentially allow us to have these extra functionality of saying, hey, I want to be able to swipe on my item and get these reveal option buttons underneath. So I don't have to think about it. I can literally just declare it like that and already have this functionality of like, okay, when I start swiping to the left, show me the buttons. I don't have to think about that. I think that's pretty great. We also have this reorder feature. So if we want to go ahead and start changing things around, we can do that. And we also have a delete button. So you can see the reorder animation going on right there. But if I want to start deleting items, I can go ahead and click that delete button on top, show it. It's all going to animate in. I don't have to think about it. And then I can just say, hey, when I click that delete button, just delete that item from the array. And earlier when I said collection, ng repeat was kind of a double-edged sword. It can be your best friend and then your worst enemy at the same time. We've kind of gone ahead and made a drop-in replacement for collection repeat that is built to mimic how native does it. So in native, they don't really render every single item on the screen. Essentially, they render enough to fit in the view, then a couple left over for safety reasons. So we're going to do the same thing here. So this is a list of some of my 3,000 favorite cats. I really like cats. So we can go here and say, all right, here's all 3,000 of them. But if you notice, scrolling is super smooth. I don't have to think about, how am I going to transition everything out. I just say collection repeat my objects in this array and give me the name of each of my cats. This is all going to just take care of everything for me. And how it's actually going to be doing this is as soon as something scrolls out of view, we're going to take that item or that element, we're going to update its data, and then transition it back to the bottom so that way it'll just scroll up with as you scroll. And this one is an example of our action sheet. So this is an example of an Ionic service that we are providing. So that way we can say, hey, when I have this function say, I want to show an action sheet, and I can pass in some buttons, I can pass in a title, some text for my delete button, a cancel button if I really wanted it. And then anytime that I come in here, I can pass in a function that'll say whatever index this button is, just console.log and give me the index. It's just a quick example to show you. This is literally all the code that I wrote, and yet I'm getting all this functionality of everything transitioning up and transitioning down. I'm dimming the background. I have all the styles set up for me. I have that little space between the delete button and the cancel button. All these little things that, again, native gets for free. We can actually get that too. And then another common one is pull to refresh. So we actually have this component called Ion Refresher, and all it really does is it takes a function that we can give it saying on refresh, we're just going to fetch more data. In whatever method that you're actually using to actually get your data, that will translate over into your controller. But if you notice our view, it's pretty simple. We just have the refresher component, we have our list, and then we have our items, most likely with an ng repeat on them. So in this example, every single time I'm pulling down, I'm just going to push a new item into my array. So I didn't really have to write too much code to get all this functionality. Again, you're on that happy path of you get all the benefits of not having to redo everything. And as a plus, we also come with these great icons and these animated SVG spinners. So in pull to refresh, we see that spinner that gets pulled down if this plays. Yes. So we see that spinner that loops. This is an example of our animated SVGs. And besides the SVGs, we also have these three distinct groups of icons. So we have a platform kind of agnostic set. We have a set that's specific to iOS. And then we also have a set specific to Android. And there's over 700 of them. And we're constantly adding more. So this will be an example of what is a real app built with Ionic look like. So come down here, switch to this directory. I'm just going to open this up in Sublime. So we're just going to load a few things in here. We're going to load the Ionic source, this JavaScript file. We're going to actually load in the Ionic CSS. We're going to actually load in some, our app.js, our factories, and all of our controllers. And then we're going to have this main view down here. So we'll look at our app.js. And before I said we had that ng app attribute, well, I've called this app Devnexus. So I gave it all the components that I'm actually going to load in. And then I can go here and configure how am I going to set some device-specific functionality for Cordova. And then I can set up my states down here and give everything a template and our controller. So we'll actually go ahead, instead of going through all the code, we're just going to start it up in the simulator. So I already have the iOS platform set up. So I'm going to do Ionic Emulate Ios. And what that's going to do is actually go out, build everything for me, similar to Cordova. In fact, it's built on top of the Cordova CLI, so that way we're reaping all the benefits of their CLI as well. So went out and built, successful, and I have this directory, and I have this app right here. So this is one demo fail I wasn't prepared for, which is great. This actually gives us a great way to show how would you debug this. So since I'm using Safari, I can come in here, and since it's a web view, I can have access to Safari's debugger. So I can load up everything I want. Awesome, so it's just a network connection. So we can see we have all of our app. I can scroll through it. If I really want to filter through everything, I can come in here. And there's a really good talk on Git that I want to see. Awesome. So I get some information about who the person is. what kind of session it's going to be. And if I really want to, I have this native functionality that I can tap into where I can take a picture and actually post to Twitter, that photo and what session I'm at. And then here, since we're on iOS, iOS has that swipe to go back feature. Well, we have that as well. So we can come in here and just swipe to reveal if we really want, and then look how everything's going to update in our header bar, in our view, and notice that this is exactly like how iOS does it. So, but that's a simulator. That's kind of boring. So let's go over to my device. Movie. It's not the worst thing. Cool. So I have my device over here. So this was built after finding out that Devnexus actually had their own app. So I like side menus, like I said. And this is essentially the same entire app, but built for iOS with Ionic. So we're in the Ionic talk right now. I want to take a photo. I'm going to take a photo of every single one of you. Actually, I'll just do it this way. So cool. I can take a photo of all of you, get a confirmation that, hey, yeah, I want to use this photo. Came out pretty well. Save it. And then I have this social sharing plugin already set up. So that way I can just push this to Twitter, if I get the hashtag right. Post this, and it's all set. So this is already posted live to Twitter, so if you check it out right now, you should see the hashtag for Devnexus and see this. Come back. If I really want to learn more about speakers, I can go ahead and look up more and get all that loaded for me in the same way that I was getting all the data from presentations. But I think one of the better features over the actual iOS app is I've integrated into Google Maps. I can get a little view of where the area is, and I can start looking for my favorite bar if I really wanted to, and actually go ahead and say, all right, that place sounds pretty good. And if I had built more into this, I could say, give me the directions and open this up in the default Maps application. And then I can come in here and I can get a view of the venue that I'm at. And if I really want to, I could call them. I'm not going to do that. So all that code, and I have something already for iOS, but let's try Android. If it'll work. Reconnect. Cool. So that's connected. So I have the same app built for Android. Again, splash screen and everything started up. But you notice we'll have some platform, like I said, we have these platform-specific tweaks. So Android actually uses a different spinner than, say, iOS. So we went ahead and we actually built that in. So essentially the same thing. And if you're seeing any lag, it's really just because of the projection. I have it up here on a device, and you can start seeing, you can see that. It's actually pretty smooth scrolling. But I want to come in here and I want to go to that Maps again. I could have the same thing. Have my left aligned title. I have more information about the gallery. And I'm loading my speakers again. So I now have a cross-platform app for iOS and Android. all written using the same code base and reusing all of that logic across platforms. Here's all the code that actually went into it. I'm not going to go ahead and go over this, but I'm going to actually push this to GitHub later on, so that way you guys can actually take a look at it. Get back to the presentation. So we now have all these pieces together, so that way we can say, hey, here's our app. We're going to use Cordova to actually build this cross-platform app. We have Angular, so that way we can actually get some coding structure into everything. And we have Ionic providing all these native-like UI components. And again, because I don't have time to go over all the details of each part, I urge you guys to take a look and Google some of these. Christoph Conrad's talk on Cordova, he goes through all the little parts of it, how to set it up, get the Android SDK, and actually build it on your computer. We have Dan Wallin's talk again on Angular. We have a couple tutorials out there, but Thinkster.io did an Ionic tutorial. They built an app, and then they actually said, hey, let's give back to the community and show people how we actually built our app. And then Manning Publication actually went out and has a book on Ionic. Independent from us, we didn't actually promote them, but they have a book on it, and it's a really great read if you want to read a book. So if you want to get started with Ionic specifically, we have a getting started guide on our website. If you check it out, ionicframework.com. We have great documentation that's actually generated from the source. So every time we add a new feature into our JavaScript or CSS, we're actually going to go ahead and document it at the same time. So that way there's no disconnect. We have a really active forum that I spend a lot of my time hanging out there helping people. And so the forum is really a really active place. And if you have any questions, you're guaranteed to get an answer within an hour or so. If you want to contribute to it, send pull requests, even just make issues, we're on GitHub, we're open source. Go ahead and hack on it all you want. And if it's a feature that we think is pretty awesome, we can integrate it back into the framework properly. So since we're giving away the framework for free, we'll go over quickly what are we going to be doing as a company that will benefit the developer. So we're going to start rolling out some services, and the first one that we're actually do is push notifications, making it easy so that way a developer can set it up and not hate the process. We're going to give you some analytics, A/B testing as well, code deploys, so that way if you deploy your app to an app store and the user downloads it, they can just go ahead and you want to push a new version, you can bypass the app store and just give them the code that they actually want. They don't need to go through the app store and re-download it again. And then we want to start building, automating these builds. So that way you don't have to set up the Android SDK. And if you're on a Windows, there are a few of you here who are, you don't have access to the iOS SDK. So you can actually go ahead and build for iOS without actually having the SDK. So recently, Angular 2 was announced, specifically last week at NGConf. And there was a lot of great features that people were showing off that were specific to the framework, Angular framework, and moving forward with it, and how it's going to be using ES6. It's going to be, you can use TypeScript. There's going to be a newer syntax that you can use, and it's going to be very powerful. So we like to think that Ionic 1.0 and Angular 1.0, we kind of feel pretty powerful. We're pretty awesome. But with Angular 2 and Ionic 2, we think we can do even better and get even more powerful and faster. So if you guys have any questions, feel free to find me out in the venue, or you can ask them here. My name is Mike Hartington again, and find me on Twitter if you really would like. So thank you. Any questions?
So I saw on the website that you have to go and edit the export project or maybe kind of like health kit and stuff like that.
Yes.
Is that something that's going to be going away eventually, or is it something you're going to always have to open and go to get those extra things?
No, you can actually integrate with some specific plugins that will go ahead and modify all the native projects for you. So if you want to get into HealthKit for iOS, there's a plugin that you can add, and it'll take care of giving you the right code that you need in the project, like the right Objective-C files. You would just have to go in and to the Apple's developer site and set everything up there. That's the one thing that I can't do. Yes?
Any type of guidelines or recommendations of like how you would structure your project? Let's say you want to do your mobile app, you probably have some reusable services in the Angular that you could share with your Angular website.
Yep.
How would you go about that?
Nothing set up right now. It's a problem that we still haven't found a great solution for, or one that we are really focusing on. Some people in our community have come out and said, hey, I've gotten this together by actually using a pretty sophisticated gulp build task. So that way they can set up a source directory that'll house everything that they're going to be authoring in. They can have a directory specific for mobile, a directory specific for desktop, and then a shared directory. And then when they want to go ahead and build everything, they'll set up the gulp task to pipe everything through. All the shared stuff is going to go here, all the mobile stuff is going to go here, and then all the desktop stuff is going to go here. So that way it's kind of automated. So essentially your views are going to be rewritten in some of your controllers, but that build process should kind of ease the pain a little bit. So no 100%, not 100%, an answer or a solution, but it is something that you could look into. Any other questions? Yes.
When is version 2 going to become available, and how does Ionic compare to Central Touch?
So version 2 won't probably be available for a little while. We're still working with the Angular team on how are they going to translate into Angular 2, and how do we, go about that process. So no ETA on that. How's it compared to Sencha? I can't personally say. I've never actually developed with Sencha, but it's not XJS or XCJS, whatever the framework is that they're using. It depends on your preference. If you don't like that framework, you can use Angular, and you still get into benefits. So I can't give you an answer. I've never done Sencha development. So sorry.
Central Touch is going away.
So Central Touch is going away. And then, yeah, Ionic's free. Any other questions? Yes.
Can you use native scrolling with connection repeats? Can you use the native scrolling with the connection repeats?
Yes, actually you can. We're slowly working on getting rid of our JavaScript scrolling and moving everything to native overflow scrolling. So on Android, it does it by default now. iOS, it's still powerful enough to actually use JavaScript scrolling, so it's not. We haven't worked with that yet. So, okay. I'll go with you.
Gaming support is SAS the only way to get around?
We're using SAS internally. If you want to actually use less, we don't have a less files yet. Probably won't, but you can still import all of Ionic's variables and everything from SAS in less, I believe. Okay. Yes?
What if you don't like Angular? Is there any effort to integrate with Meteor?
If you don't like Angular, Ionic is probably not the option for you. Actually, Angular is pretty great. And since it's moving forward to using less of its own kind of hacks and polyfills and using web components, ES6, thank you, and TypeScript, it's becoming more standard. It's becoming more like you're writing traditional JavaScript. So it's not so much of a hurdle to actually get over and learn that syntax. For the framework, we are sticking with Angular. So sorry about that. You.
Much focus is there on the Angular test
Test. Well, since it's using Angular, Angular prides itself on being very testable. So if you're used to doing anything with Angular, writing unit tests or using Protractor, that can all be translated over into using Ionic as well. Am I good on time? Am I good? Okay. Yes.
So if I have a desktop application in the so what will I need to do if I want to draw?
All right, I'm gonna run down there and actually. So what was that question?
So I have a desktop application.
Yeah.
Basically, you install your software.
So what will
You gotta buy them.
So if you're using Bootstrap, but you're already using Angular, half the work's already there for you, so you actually can just go ahead and copy over all like your services and just rewrite your views, and anything that's going to be specific for mobile in your controllers would just have to be redone. Okay, so it'd be actually pretty fair. Yeah, you can still use ngRepeat. Cool. So I think that's everything. So thank you guys for coming. What's that? Oh, so my link for GitHub, it'd be github.com/mhartington, H-A-R-T, or just like the Twitter handle, /Devnexus. And that should be pushed up actually now. So yeah, I'm going to push my slide deck and I'll tweet that. I'll leave a link in the GitHub repository. Cool.